The name Vlad Dracula echoes through history like a curse, not for his conquests, nor for his armies, but for something far darker. The screams that ursuz from his forests of the impaled. In an age when kings measured greatness in castles and crowns, Vlad measured his reign in corpses. His throne was not built of wood or stone, but of sharpened stakes, slick with blood. To understand how such a man was born, we must first step into his world, a Europe on fire. It was the mid-15th century, and the Ottoman Empire surged westward like an unstoppable tide. Constantinople had fallen, the Christian kingdoms trembled, and the frontiers of Eastern Europe became a battlefield where survival itself was uncertain. At the very edge of this storm lay Wallachia, a fragile principality nestled between two giants, the Ottoman Empire to the south and the Kingdom of Hungary to the north. Wallachia was no nation of strength. It was a pawn, a buffer state whose rulers lived on borrowed time. One wrong alliance, one missed tribute payment, and its throne would be overturned, its people enslaved, its land devoured. Vlad III was born into this crucible in 1431, the son of Vlad II Dracula. The Dragon, a knight of the Order of the Dragon sworn to defend Christendom against the Turk. But noble oaths meant little in Wallachia. The boy grew up in a land where betrayal was routine, where nobles shifted loyalties with every campaign, and where mercy was a luxury no ruler could afford. The young Vlad's life was carved by violence and humiliation. His father, seeking to secure Wallachia's survival, handed him and his brother Radu over as hostages to the Ottoman court. There, in the heart of enemy territory, Vlad spent his formative years. The Ottomans were not gentle tutors. As a political hostage, Vlad lived under the constant reminder that any disobedience by his father could mean his death. He witnessed executions staged as theater, men beheaded in the square, rebels roasted alive, traitors flayed in front of jeering crowds. Punishment was not just justice. It was a performance, carefully designed to teach every onlooker one lesson: defiance means agony. Vlad absorbed these lessons with cold fascination. He saw that fear was sharper than any sword. He saw that rulers who sought love and loyalty were quickly betrayed. And he learned that cruelty, when systematic, when displayed, could become the most powerful weapon of all. But the Ottomans taught him another lesson as well. Submission breeds contempt. While his younger brother Radu adapted, charming his captors and even embracing Ottoman culture, Vlad seethed with resentment. Every humiliation, every lash of fear burned into him like a brand. When news finally came of his father's assassination at the hands of Wallachian nobles, the boy learned another bitter truth. Treachery was not limited to foreign enemies. His elder brother Mircea was tortured and buried alive by Hungarian rivals. Vlad was now heir to a throne that was little more than a death sentence. The boy who returned to Wallachia was no longer a boy at all. He was steel wrapped in flesh, a youth who had looked cruelty in the eye and decided that survival meant becoming cruelty itself. In 1448, at just 17 years old, Vlad claimed the throne for the first time. But his grip was tenuous, his allies uncertain, and his enemies circling like wolves. Wallachia was fractured by noble clans who had murdered his father, divided between Ottoman loyalists and Hungarian opportunists, each ready to betray him for a coin or a promise. Most rulers in his position might have sought compromise, gathering allies, bargaining with nobles, carefully balancing the demands of the great powers pressing at his borders. Vlad chose another path. He had seen what fear could do. He had watched empires bend entire peoples with terror. And now, standing at the crossroads of survival and annihilation, Vlad resolved not to beg, not to barter, not to trust. Instead, he would rule as he had been taught in captivity, through the certainty of pain. His enemies would not merely die. They would become warnings. His punishments would not be justice, but spectacles. And in time, even the whisper of his name would be enough to silence rebellion before it began. What the Ottomans had shown him, Vlad would now perfect. The boy prince had returned to his homeland, but he did not return as a savior. He returned as something else entirely, a man who would make cruelty his crown and terror his throne. The stakes were being sharpened, the forests were waiting, and the world was about to meet Vlad the Impaler. For most rulers, execution was a grim necessity, a method to punish crime, silence traitors, or strike fear into enemies. For Vlad Dracula, it was something else entirely. Execution became theater, cruelty transformed into art, and his masterpiece was impalement. Impalement was not new. Ancient empires had used it as a tool of terror, but under Vlad it was refined into a science of suffering. His stakes were not sharpened to kill quickly. Instead, they were deliberately blunted, crafted to slide slowly into the body, tearing but not severing, maximizing agony while prolonging life. The method was grotesquely precise. Victims were forced onto the stake, which was carefully inserted, often through the rectum or vagina, and angled to avoid vital organs. Then the pole was raised upright. Gravity did the rest, drawing the body down inch by inch. Death could take hours. Sometimes it took days. Witnesses describe how Vlad's executioners could control the path of the stake with chilling skill. Some emerged through the chest, others the shoulder, others even the mouth, each variation producing a different timeline of torment. The finest executioners ensured victims remained conscious as long as possible, screaming in full awareness of their fate. But it was not the method alone that made Vlad's reign infamous. It was his use of scale and spectacle. He did not impale one man. He impaled hundreds, thousands. Villages of corpses lined the roads like ghastly orchards of flesh. Travelers would stumble upon these fields, where bodies in varying stages of decomposition moaned and writhed, while birds circled overhead in an endless feast. The smell was unbearable, the sight unforgettable. These forests of the impaled were not random cruelty. They were messages carved into human bodies. Defy me, and this will be your fate. Merchants returning to Germany, Italy, and Hungary carried tales of these macabre displays. One German traveler described arriving at Targoviste, Vlad's capital, only to find the central square transformed into a concentric circle of the dying. Hundreds of stakes radiated outward, each bearing its own corpse, some fresh, some rotting, some still moving. The stench was so overwhelming that even the horses refused to enter the city. But Vlad's cruelty was not limited to foreigners. His most infamous act of domestic terror came in 1459, during an Easter feast that would stain Wallachian history forever. The nobles of Wallachia, the boyars, had long been Vlad's bitterest enemies. They were the men who had betrayed his father, assassinated him, and buried Vlad's elder brother alive. They were also parasites on the realm, exploiting their people while shifting allegiances between Hungary and the Ottomans. That Easter, Vlad invited them to a grand banquet At Targoviste, the boyars arrived in their finest garments, bringing wives and children, expecting reconciliation and festivity. The hall glittered with candlelight, and wine flowed freely. Vlad himself rose to address them, speaking of unity and forgiveness. Then, with a signal, the doors were sealed. The elderly boyars were seized and impaled immediately, their screams echoing through the feasting hall. The younger nobles and their families were marched away, stripped of titles and forced into slavery. Vlad drove them to the mountains, where they were worked to death building the fortress that would later be known as Castle Dracula. Contemporary accounts claim that Vlad personally dined among the impaled that day, sipping wine while the nobles writhed around him. He mocked their suffering, offering sympathy in jest, pausing to correct his executioners on technique, as though they were sculptors refining a masterpiece. By eliminating an entire generation of boyars, Vlad shattered the traditional power of Wallachnia's aristocracy. He ruled now without rivals, his authority absolute, his throne built on the broken bodies of his enemies. Foreigners who witnessed these events carried the stories back to their courts. Saxon merchants, Hungarian envoys, even Ottoman spies, all returned with tales so grotesque that many were initially dismissed as exaggerations. Yet as reports multiplied, as witnesses from across Europe and the Middle East told the same horrors, the world realized these were not legends. They were truths too terrible to invent. And so Vlad's reputation spread like a plague. His name became synonymous with dread. For peasants, he was a protector against corrupt nobles and foreign raiders. For nobles and invaders, he was a demon in human flesh. The cruelty was effective. Rebellions withered before they began. Armies hesitated at his borders. Diplomats trembled in his court. And all of this was achieved not by wealth nor numbers, but by the genius of fear. Yet his cruelty would not remain confined to boyars and merchants. Soon, even the mighty Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, conqueror of Constantinople, would encounter Vlad's handiwork and recoil in horror. The year was 1462. The Ottoman Empire had swallowed Constantinople, shattered the last vestiges of Byzantium, and now looked north. Wallachia was small, poor, and fragile, but strategically vital. To Mehmed II, it was nothing more than a tributary state, expected to bow, pay, and obey. When his ambassadors arrived at Vlad's court to demand greater tribute, they brought with them the full weight of the Sultan's authority. They expected obedience. They found something else. As the audience began, the ambassadors refused to remove their turbans, citing Islamic law. Vlad appeared to accept this explanation, smiling coldly. Then he made his decree. Since their turbans were so sacred, they should never part from them again. Iron spikes were brought forth. Guards seized the envoys, and one by one, their turbans were nailed to their skulls. Blood streamed down their faces as their screams filled the hall. Some died instantly. Others were dragged outside and impaled, still wearing their blood-soaked turbans, their corpses displayed as a direct message to Mehmed II. Diplomatic immunity meant nothing in Wallachia. The Ottomans had demanded submission. Vlad answered with mutilation and death. Mehmed's response was inevitable. He would not allow a petty prince to mock the power of the empire. In the spring of 1462, the Sultan marched north with a vast army. Some chronicles claim over 150,000 men, though modern historians suggest closer to 60,000. Still, Even the lower estimate dwarfed Vlad's forces. By every measure of wealth, arms, and manpower, Wallachia should have been crushed. But Vlad knew he could not win with swords alone. He would wage war not on the body of the Ottoman army, but on its soul. What followed was one of the most horrifying scorched earth campaigns in history. As the Ottomans advanced, they found villages eerily intact, doors open, livestock visible, wells untouched. Yet when they entered, the illusion collapsed. The inhabitants were corpses, impaled outside their homes, whole families suspended on stakes. The wells were poisoned, not merely with toxins but with rotting bodies, contaminating the water and filling the air with stench. Granaries contained not wheat, but dismembered corpses. Trees were decorated with severed limbs. Roads were lined with mutilated prisoners arranged in grotesque tableaux. The Ottomans had expected a campaign of conquest. Instead, they marched through a landscape of nightmares. Soldiers recoiled. Supply trains faltered. The very terrain became an ally of Vlad, each hill and valley whispering death. Then came Vlad's boldest move. In June 1462, under the cover of night, he launched a surprise assault on Mehmed's camp. His target was not the army at large, but the Sultan himself. Vlad and his men infiltrated the camp, killing guards, torching tents, and driving chaos through the sleeping host. The attack nearly succeeded. Some accounts suggest Vlad cut his way to the very edge of Mehmed's command tent before being driven back. Though the Sultan escaped, the message was unmistakable, even in the heart of the Ottoman army, even under the banner of the Crescent. You are not safe from Dracula. The Ottomans pressed on, but the horror only deepened. Outside Targoviste, Mehmed's army stumbled upon a sight that even the conqueror of Constantinople could not stomach: a forest of 20,000 impaled prisoners. As far as the eye could see, Ottoman captives, soldiers, merchants, peasants, writhed and rotted on stakes. The screams of the dying mingled with the buzzing of flies. The stench of putrefaction hung thick in the summer air. The Sultan, hardened by decades of war, was shaken. Chroniclers claim he turned his horse away, declaring that he could not wage war against a man who does things worse than the devil himself. Though Mehmed did not abandon the campaign entirely, his momentum faltered. The fear Vlad had engineered, through cruelty, through spectacle, through the merciless theater of suffering, had accomplished what armies could not. The most powerful military machine in the world recoiled. For a brief moment, it seemed as though Vlad's strategy had triumphed. Against impossible odds, he had stopped the Sultan. His land was ravaged, his people terrified, but Wallachia stood, and yet, beneath the surface, cracks had already begun to spread. His cruelty, so effective against foreign armies, was poisoning his own kingdom. Nobles lived in terror, peasants in despair, allies in disgust. Even Hungary, once his greatest supporter, began to whisper that perhaps Vlad was too dangerous to rule. His forests of the impaled had bought him victory, but they had also begun to carve the path to his downfall. Fear had been Vlad's sharpest weapon. It had silenced rebels, shattered armies, and driven back even the mighty Sultan of the Ottomans. But fear is a blade with two edges. It protects and it isolates. By 1462, Vlad's isolation was complete. His scorched earth victory against Mehmed II had left Wallachia a wasteland. Its fields were burned, its villages emptied, its population broken by terror. Nobles who might have counseled him were dead or in exile. Merchants who might have rebuilt. The economy avoided his borders. Even his peasants, once cowed into obedience, now lived in paralyzing dread of their own ruler. The cracks widened when word reached Hungary. King Matthias Corvinus, who had long supported Vlad as a Christian bulwark against the Ottomans, now faced pressure from other European powers. Reports of Vlad's atrocities, carried by Saxon merchants, German travelers, and even Hungarian envoys, painted him not as a defender of Christendom, but as a barbaric liability. By the end of 1462, Vlad was captured by Hungarian forces, not executed. No, he was too useful alive, but imprisoned, locked away for 12 long years. The man who had commanded forests of the impaled now lived in the shadows of a foreign castle, a prisoner of politics rather than a master of fear. Yet even in chains, his legend grew. In the German states, the newly invented printing press churned out pamphlets detailing his atrocities. Titles like "The Frightening and Truly Extraordinary Story of a Wicked Tyrant" called Dracula spread across Europe, filled with lurid accounts of boiling men alive, skinning captives, and impaling mothers with their infants. Some stories were exaggerated, some invented, but all were rooted in the chilling truths carried by witnesses. The tales transformed Vlad from a regional warlord into a pan-European monster. For nobles, he was the warning of tyranny unrestrained. For commoners, he became both a devil and, paradoxically, a hero. A ruler so cruel that he had terrified even the Turks. When Vlad was finally released in 1475, the political landscape had shifted. Hungary, once his jailer, now needed him again. The Ottomans pressed ever deeper into Europe, and Matthias Corvinus saw value in unleashing the old terror upon them once more. And so, Vlad returned to Wallachia in 1476, reclaiming his throne for a final, fleeting moment. But he was no longer the figure he had once been. The world had changed. His name still carried dread, but his methods no longer inspired paralysis. The boyars were gone, the peasants exhausted, his allies suspicious. His terror had lost its edge. That same year, Vlad rode into battle against the Ottomans once more. But this time, there would be no forests of the impaled, no scorched earth to terrify his enemies into retreat. There was only blood, steel, and death. Accounts differ on how he died. Some say he was betrayed by his own men, mistaken for a Turk in the chaos of battle. Others claim he fell beneath a swarm of Ottoman blades. What is certain is that Vlad Dracula, the Impaler, died as he had lived, violently, surrounded by enemies, without mercy, without love. His head was severed and sent to Mehmed II, a grisly trophy to prove that the devil of Wallachia was dead at last. His body, they say, was buried at Snagov Monastery. Yet no grave has ever been confirmed, and so Vlad passed from history into legend. The printing presses kept his memory alive, transforming him into a mythic figure of cruelty. In time, his name would inspire Bram Stoker's immortal creation, Count Dracula, the vampire who feeds on blood. But where the vampire is a creature of supernatural horror, the real Vlad Dracula is far more terrifying. He required no fangs, no coffin, no magic. His evil was human, calculated, rational, and deliberate. His story reveals the paradox of cruelty, effective in the short term, ruinous in the long. His terror eliminated enemies and deterred invasion, but it also destroyed his economy, alienated his allies, and left him politically toxic. Fear had given him power, but it also guaranteed his downfall. Yet perhaps the darkest truth lies not in his fall, but in his success. For more than a decade, fear worked. His reign proves that systematic cruelty, when applied with precision, can sustain power, and that is what makes his story so chilling. Vlad Dracula was no monster of fantasy. He was a man who understood human psychology and chose to weaponize it. Today, his legacy forces us to confront an unsettling truth. The line between civilization and barbarism is thin. When power goes unchecked, when conscience is silenced, when cruelty is turned into calculation, the results can eclipse even the darkest fiction. The vampire is terrifying because it is inhuman. The real Vlad Dracula is terrifying because he was all too human.